your sense of where this is going, because this is an active topic, and we've seen this in the news a bunch lately. But more importantly, you guys to be in the news, or me to be in the news for making a bad decision. So what I wanted to do was outline some of the considerations around ethics and some of the things that we're thinking about in Intel, and then hopefully we can have a little bit of a conversation. But this came out of two things. One was working with my engineers, seeing questions not being I thought should be asked. Secondarily, seeing some things online that outside observers were seeing. So I can yak for. So first of all, this is a presentation that includes a bunch of images and stuff that I don't actually own. So I'm required by Intel to put a disclaimer at the very beginning that says I don't own all these images. So modeling ethical behavior. Here we go. So the Intel logo, since I work for Intel, we own that. We represent that IP. But all the other images that you can see here today, I need to own. There. Disclaimer stated. Okay. So I can go on to the more fun part, which is this was one of the things that inspired me, which was Silicon Valley. You guys have seen. So Kamal went and talked to a bunch of people. He does research for his character, and he had this great little Twitter thread where he pointed out he talks to companies and he's like, "Cool, that's a really interesting thing. Have you thought about the ethics of that?" And his experience was that people had. Now, I know a lot of people in tech, and I know people think about this, but his experience was that people were not thinking about ethical implications. And if that's the perception, we're screwed. Like we need to ensure that people know that we actually care about this. You guys are all here because you care about it. Eric invited me to talk about this because we care about it. So let's talk about ethics. So when you hear ethics in tech, typically you hear some random big ideas, like Elon Musk saying, the planet is in peril because AI is going to eat us all, or you also see something like Spielberg's AI movie, which was the Pinocchio story. Some people thought it was pretty good, except of course for the aliens at the end. And then you have Asimov's 3 Laws of Robotics, which go all the way back to the 70s, right? So when people hear ethics in AI, they think about things like this. So, of course, the problem with this construct is that there's not really a locus of ethical decision-making here. Like, a robot doesn't have real agency. They don't really have anything at stake. So that's something that we do have something at stake. That's the difference between us and a system we design. We have mortal actors. We have a locus of ethical responsibility. And they are future AI counterparts or whatever. They don't have an ultimate incentive to act. We do. So this is really the state of affairs. People who don't work on the real technology today are commenting on it and thinking, oh, there's going to be this future. But it's a great popular topic, but I'd like to drill into the actual algorithm and some of the steps that happen, moments, bits, flips, things. So, for example, when we're working on an automotive SDK at Intel, and we work with a number of partners. So there isn't a black and white, like the car will do this bad thing. No, there's a statistical probability. You guys all know this. Machine learning is stats. So you have a 60% chance of hitting this side of the street with 2 people. You have a 15% chance of hitting that side. Maybe you might strike nobody if you get lucky. But it's all percentages, right? Or like here's a system that we're working on right now, which is machine learning training. So, notice the absence of black and white decision making, right? You're getting inputs, you're doing models, you're doing inference on those models. Same here. Here's some inference loop code that I have in one of my products. Okay, so this is allowing the model to be loaded, initializing, getting outputs. So, of course, this leads to the next step, which is you have outcomes that affect real people. So we're going to get into that for a second, but first let me discuss some of those kind of silly predictions. So robots are not all here. There's AI predictions all over the map. Smart people believe kind of dumb things, top things. So let's talk instead about algorithms, because that's an instruction set that all of us work on. We all create algorithms. That's how things are designed. So here's a stack that gets increasingly more complicated and closer to actual people. So this is a guy with a smart surveillance system where he has things being identified. So we start with an image. We know there's an image there. Then we go to where is that location for the image. There's a crowd there. There's a person in the crowd. We can identify characteristics of the people. We can match against databases, and then we can use that behavior that we've detected to predict future activity. Okay, those are increasing complexity of information derived from the video stream. So each of these can be separate algorithms. You can package them all together. But this is a pretty standard stack for computer vision. That's why I asked early on, anyone working computer vision? Because we might have an interesting discussion. We just launched today the Open Visual Analytics stack from Intel. And so that's part of what I'm talking about. We did not know the launch date was going to be today. It happens. So anyway, here's a crowd, right? We're detecting motion. We're detecting faces. So that's kind of step one. It's sort of gray. You can disambiguate between people and dogs or people and cars. But that's step one. And then we can go to another level of granularity where we're identifying individual faces. And then we can get even more granular and understand which people these are. Okay, now it starts to get really interesting because I can do things with that. I can match this face against the database. So if I have access to a police database, I could say, hey, that guy's a bank robber. Or I could say, this person is exhibiting pickpocket behavior. Okay, suspicious behavior, we want to go out there and arrest that person. In some municipalities, you could do that based just purely on behavior analysis. I'm talking globally. ICE is currently identifying people. I don't have access to the algorithms they're using, but I'm sure they're using some to be able to interrogate people. Elsewhere in the world, same thing. So, and this person over here, well, this is a race and gender that we just want to kill. Okay, someplace here, an ethical line was crossed, but where exactly? It's not really clear where that line was crossed. But somewhere in that stack, a bit was flipped that has a real implication on everybody's life here. So, these algorithms were all theoretically designed with good intentions. So they were used for public surveillance, for crime prevention, right? But, they can also go the other way, which is the same function can be used in a way that is very negative. And some countries are using this to identify people for their own purposes that may not match your ethics. Match ethics there. So ethics can be variable in context. So how do you draw a line? One of the inspirations for this talk was the fact that I sat down with one of my engineers and said, dude, what you're designing here can be used in a way that exposes everybody. And you should really compartmentalize what you're doing. Build some containers, ensure that people understand the choices they're making. Don't just turn on access to every database that you have access to. Make sure that people are actually choosing. And he said, why? I'm just building chaotic neutral technology. What people make of it, that makes them good or evil. And that's not actually the case because you are designing stuff. You can make ethical choices. You can decide how your technology can easily, or you can put up some barriers to make it harder. You can actually make some choices at the design stage. So that's called ethical decision making. And so what I'd like to have happen in the industry is that we can flip the bit so that we understand that we can ask the questions early on. We can put it in the early design stage rather than waiting for technology and then trying to clean up after the fact. One of the low-hanging fruits is ethical. It doesn't have to be. So let's talk a little bit about what ethics is and isn't. I'll just flip through this quickly. I assume most people might know this, but it's really useful to ground us in basic knowledge, that it's not just legal, it's not just religion. So, it's not just what's legal. We have a legal department. What legal says is okay doesn't mean necessarily ethical. So, for example, you can identify people by family origin. This is an obvious one. But, everything that happened in Germany in 1945, totally legal. We're very scrupulous to follow every law. So just because it's legal doesn't mean you should do that. Think about, okay, I followed the law, but is that lawyer somebody I actually trust? Is that actually ethical behavior? Same with this. We can identify based on racial characteristics. Well, we did that before. That's a consequence. Same with today. Right now, we're tracking people using algorithms that were used for surveillance, and yet it has outcomes that is largely seen as. And this is also where you have to make decisions. You can't foist it off on some corporation. Foist it off on, like, well, the boss told me to do that. No, people in Germany in 1945, it was not okay to say I was following orders. Same thing with us. I mean, we're designing technology now that has life methods. So here's kind of a basic thing to keep in mind. Things can be ethical and legal. Things can be legal but not ethical. Things like, for you, is it ethical to spend a lot of time on? Is it ethical to kill people because your government said it was okay to kill them? Is it ethical to track people with hidden software? Somebody might have said it was legal. Same over here, that you could understand that some things are ethical for you or ethical in your culture, but may not be legal at all. You could be executed in some for these. So keeping the line between legal and ethical and understanding is really important. Legal departments only have your back in terms of the law. They don't have your back in terms of ethics per se. That's a whole other discussion I could have with a group of lawyers. But okay, and then ethics and religion. And I've talked to two people who I work with, one of whom said, well, yeah, I'm ethical. I'm Christian. I do everything the Christian way. Okay, I talked to somebody else who said, dude, we need to base this on Buddhist principles. Well, okay, those are two ways to think about ethics, but that's not actually an ethical construct. It's a religious construct. So religion, it's a bunch of ideas, beliefs that inform moral behavior that claim to say we should act this way because of some larger belief. It's not the same thing, though. Now, in a room like this, often I get people saying, well, I'm an atheist, or I don't think that really has a bearing on behavior. But the problem is, your users believe this. And the majority of people in the world have some adherence to cultural or religious beliefs that are informed by religion. So you can't entirely ignore religion if you want to have users. If you plan to have human beings use your stuff, a lot of them will be religious. A lot of them will want to know that you actually know about their religion and their culture. And fortunately, religion does have something to say that are broadly shared. So you can start there and then build out some ethical decision making that may not be in conformance with a particular faith set of beliefs, but may be informed by it. So, you can have a conversation that starts there. It's really useful. Okay, and ethics of course doesn't mean it's so simple. So, I already talked about this, but understanding that being neutral is to be able to say, I went the extra mile. So here's what ethics is. It's an academic discipline. It's a philosophical approach to things, but it's asking questions about what are the how do we systemize? Who could be hurt by this? What are the implications of these design decisions? And how do we understand this logically? Potential outcomes. Are you guys familiar with the trolley problem? Okay, so you guys are, so basically, I'll summarize it very quickly here. Somebody with a lever, that's you, or your user, makes a decision. Are we going to impact 5 people or 1 person? and I'm saying impact because it's not about just hitting someone. It's also, do we expose a lot of information or a little bit of information? You know, what if this information is highly privileged by the government, but this information is available? You know, when we think about this information flow, not just life and death, it has more connection to our day-to-day activity. A lot of what we do is collect that information. So, oh yeah, one more thing that we should keep in mind is that ethics can depend on culture. This is a standard trope in vehicle development, where you know, your car is going to strike a crowd. Will it kill the old person or the young person? And it's kind of a misnomer because the car is never really going to make that decision. In fact, in Germany, it's now illegal to base a decision like that on age. But here's what's interesting. Different cultures have different ethical norms. So, and I'm generalizing broadly, but in some cultures, you would really privilege the wisdom and experience, and in other cultures, you really privilege the youth. So as a broad generalization, Asian cultures would want to save the elder person, and European cultures would want to save the younger person. So what you think is standard human behavior may not be true for everybody. You need to think about what's the context of where my technology would be deployed. And, well, small example. Another example. I was working with an IT to use facial recognition to identify people. Piece of cake, except when you went to the Middle East, where it's not okay to have a woman show her face to and this is only some Middle Eastern culture. I'm generalizing broadly. Not okay for a woman to show her face to a man she didn't know. So, facial identification for women, gosh, they got all the men registered. No women. There were no women in that. Okay, that's a problem. So understanding culturally how your technology will be used and not making assumptions that your state of affairs is the same everywhere or that your cultural is about. This is important to understand. So get some people to help you there. So I'm going to whip through this too, but this is important to understand. Acting ethically, okay, stay out of prison. Again, just doing legal is insufficient. You know, we just had Zuckerberg testify. We've had people who get called on the carpet for behavior that was legal. You know, you can follow all the legal rules, but you'll still be called to testify. And here's something really important. And Amazon is finding this out right now in Seattle. I won't get into all the commentary on that, but basically, if you behave in an ethical manner and you contribute to your society and you don't support bribery or corruption, you're actually creating a stable society. You're creating a more predictable society that businesses can count on. This is part of the reason that India is China to growth, because rampant corruption. So businesses know they'll be screwed if they do business there. And India has taken noticeable steps to curb corruption. So if you act ethically, you're actually creating something to be mutually profitable. And then it actually pays to be ethical. Companies that foreground their ethical behavior pay higher dividends, make more money. There are numerous studies out there. But like the Wall Street Journal, Forbes both point this out. And finally, it's the right thing to do. Wouldn't you want to be proud of what you did? So being able to say, yes, I built that. It was an ethical system. We did these good things, rather than, yeah, I kind of screwed some people over. So, you know, these are obvious, but the technical decisions we're making have a real impact. We're seeing the privacy, but all of these are human rights that can be impacted by decisions that we might be neutral, but really have an impact. So, let's talk about algorithm design. Now, really, the meat of the topic. I really like this morning. I just grabbed this off the screen this morning. Let's ask the awkward questions early. So, when you think about architecture and design, are you actually here? So, here's a bunch of awkward questions you could ask. You know, we can do that. Should we be doing that? And who's going to be benefited by that? And what are the consequences? What are the unintended? And what can we do to mitigate? So a system failure is not only when your system goes down hard, but it's also when somebody is screwed over by your system, or when when somebody raises a flag that you never saw coming and says, hey, this violates my cultural norm. You never saw that coming. That's a system failure. That's a design issue. And so the people who are affected by this technology, have you asked them? Not like, hey, here's how you should react. Have you asked them how they're really reacting? So we saw a fail point just over the last couple of weeks with something I love. I love AI that I can talk to. But the problem with this is that yawningly absent was a sense that they had thought about the ethical consideration. Like, people are creeped the fuck out by this. People don't want to be lied to by your technology. So be forthright. Tell them what you're doing. If you tell people what you're doing, they can then make a choice to. So the concern wasn't that it worked. The concern was that people weren't told. And so again, if you can over-inform people, if you can go to users and say, we're going to do this thing, can we get input from the people who will be affected by this thing early on? Okay, so that's one thing that you can do. Another thing is, of course, you rule out the morally unacceptable with technically impossible things, but you should consider each of these as equal, rather than saying, yeah, we're going to design the system and then we'll put this on as a weak leg. Instead, let's design this as a holistic system. Let's think about all three of these things as co-equal design principles, and think through it as part of the core design function with all the stakeholders at the table, not just the people who are going to make money out of it, which is all too often. With my boss, with his boss, and we've all agreed we're going to do this. Well, there's a whole bunch of voices in that conversation. And also, reject groupthink. If your team all looks the same, talks the same, comes from the same culture, you have a problem because you aren't able to understand how people will use it. Again, if you want to have users who all look like this, you're probably fine. But if you want your system to scale, then this team is not going to get you there. Neither is this team. Neither is this team. This team might. This is part of my team at Intel, where we have people from every culture in the world that I can think of, and many languages. And when I'm meeting with my Chinese team, my Russian team, my Argentina team, and me, I'm a minority at that table. But I need to explain how our system will work in all of those countries and all of those cultures. And if you're designing a system in isolation, try to get inputs from people all over, because if you're building something for humans, get a diverse cross-section of people, of different humans. Foster disagreement. If you have somebody at the table who always disagrees, keep them on the team, because they will tell you how you might be wrong. It's really important to get this. Like the groupthink thing, that will screw us over. Because the more that we agree with each other, like I love the Google duplex AI experiment. I love it. Well, I'm comfortable with it because I'm an open book. But there are people who would be deeply uncomfortable with it. And getting those people at the table who say, I'm uncomfortable, I'm uncomfortable, that's helpful. And then also being able to understand, this is an important way to think about it. So if you think about the little decisions rather than high-level ideas, then your team will be stronger. Every little decision you make, your engineering team will become stronger. And you're able to fix problems small. Trying to retrofit this later is very, very hard to do. As we found with system design, if you design something and you know it doesn't scale, it's often better just to start over rather than try to retrofit scaling. Same with ethical decisions. Make those APIs open so that you can change them. Don't create black boxes that are impossible. Okay, and then demand. Don't just request, but get somebody to give some input on an ethical level. So all of us have implicit bias. Sometimes we have overt explicit bias, but unintended consequences. Get somebody to weigh in who didn't work on it. Get somebody to weigh in who has never seen this before. And if your tech is successful, that means somebody will replicate it. Everybody will be doing this. Is that the world you want to live in? Is that where you want to go? And then users what concerns they have, not for usability like this, but instead, what's your comfort level like? And then listen to those people. Listen to their. Okay, so here's one classic ethical philosopher, Immanuel Kant. He said, act in such a way that if everyone did this, that would be a world you want to live in. I think sometimes people have said, oh, I'm developing neutral technology, so it's fine, without thinking about, yeah, if this goes to its logical extension, is that where I want to live? Do I want all my... So the motives can't be... You can decide to make changes based on you, what you think about early on. Make those changes. So, okay, here's another example. If you build a system, you could be culpable for the entirety of the system. And in many countries on this, you're culpable if you build it. But if you componentize it, you break it down, then people who put this together are the culpable party. This is a good thing to think about when you're in a system. Design your system so it can be, beautiful for that. And then you can take down or replace different components, and you can also have your system integrator be the person who makes the decisions. The user, you can walk through each separately rather than we have this thing, it does this thing. Good luck with that black box. Componentize it, explain each component. It takes a little bit of work, but it will save you so much grief from experience. So here's some examples of componentizing. We're doing pre-processing, we're doing modeling, we're deploying, we're doing these separate units, rather than all as just one black box. And this is on purpose, so that we're designing in ethical choke or moments. So I have a couple slides, practical next steps, and I figured we could have a conversation. One is, this is kind of business task. So take some responsibility. And then place a value on it. If you don't actually place a value on this, nobody's going to. People are going to be like, yeah, I have this good thing, but nobody's paying me for it. And besides, if I'm a blower, I'll get it. Don't do that. Like, actually place a value on it. And then also try to get input, as I said, from outside parties who are not bought in already, who are not. And then finally, own the possible outcomes. Spell them out. Like Adrian said this morning. What happens if this fails? Okay, you say your data is really protected. Great. What happens if all the data is exposed? Okay. What happens if the database of people who said they don't want to be contacted is contacted? What happens? What happens if those pictures get out? What happens if the vehicle wipes all the learning that it's done and starts from the baseline? Is the baseline good enough to be safe? Think through what are the possible outcomes and be explicit. Spell those out. Don't let marketing rule the roost on this, because marketing loves AI and they're all over it. Don't let them go there. And then engineering tasks. Seek input. Why are we doing this? Okay, have we really thought about why? And then provide some access, like I talked about. Don't create one big black box. Monetize it. And then don't let wrong explanations persist out there. This happens so many times that somebody will say, yeah, I can do this thing. Well, no, it doesn't really do that. It does these other subcomponents that add up to that outcome that looks like that thing. It's not quite the thing. So try to explain to people how things are working. I know this takes work, but when you educate your partners, your users, everybody stronger, and your system will be more resilient to waves of you've already explained it. And Apple has been pretty good at explaining to people what they're doing. They don't always succeed perfectly, but they try to use human language to explain what you're doing. And the more that we can use language, and we're doing this thing, we think it has these benefits, but it could also have these downsides. You should know. So explain that. And then, like I talked about, if you compartmentalize, it makes that slippery slope of functions matching to the database a little bit harder for on you. People all along the chain make those decisions. So I have one more thing that is kind of an interesting idea to consider. I was talking to some of the blockchain people upstairs. Is there anyone from that blockchain partner? Well, anyway, we had a good conversation, and I think this is interesting. So if you had like your whole stack of components, each of which were in a ledger. You guys are familiar with blockchain generally? Okay, so each of your components in your system, in your stack, what if each of those were in a ledger? So here's all of the algorithms that are used on that video. Remember? So I go from the basic version all the way to predictive analysis information. If I had that and I put it all in the ledger, then I could actually track back where each component or each algorithm came from. So I could say, okay, this algorithm came from our partners over here. This algorithm was developed by this team. This algorithm uses the API that's open source, etc. You can track it back and actually preserve it. Then you could say, this is the one with the problem. We're going to turn that one, or we're going to flag that for our customers and say, don't use a stack that has that algorithm in it. Or you could also establish a chain of custody, a chain of moral culpability. You could say this company did that thing. Of course, the downside is, since this is permanent and you can't change it, it's a big problem. Or one of the design considerations around blockchain. Could be a problem, could be a good thing. Design considerations.
So from a security perspective, that code leaked out to some country where it was not intended. Yeah. That blockchain could actually sit back and your code is now running.
Yeah, it's in Syria. Okay, what the hell happened here? Who leaked it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good.
It's an interesting idea. There are some downsides, but yeah, there's no right to be forgotten either. What if your component existed, you disavowed it, it's still in the ledger? And right now we're seeing tech all over the map, like from U.S. to Iran. You guys know about it. Okay, so basically, ZTE is a Chinese phone manufacturer. Okay, so they source a hell of a lot of stuff from the U.S. from all sorts of companies. There's a vast list. It's Google, Intel, all sorts of companies that provide components. Okay, so ZTE makes phones, great. So now some ZTE components and algorithms are now being used by Iran. Okay, the only way they got there was somebody traced it back to ZTE. So the U.S. just said, okay, 7-year moratorium on any U.S. company doing any business with ZTE. Period. So that's like $2 billion of value. Boom. Right, like you just said, boom. Right? So if you had that in a ledger, you could easily chase it back to the one guy who, right? So, I think this could solve something, but it has some unintended. So, this isn't shipping yet. But I think it's an interesting idea because if we had a chain of moral culpability, you could say, yeah, that person built that thing that fired this, killed that. Okay, great, we know who did that, right? Hypothetically. So, I'm just trying to think out loud and think about, are there ways that we could create better technology with the tech we have? Yeah.
And then what do you do with like false flags? What if my fingerprint is close enough to somebody else's that has done bad things, and I get flagged as do not fly or whatever?
Right. A small personal example. I write novels for fun. So last year I was writing a novel that was set in the War on Terror. And so I did a lot of research on roadside bombs. I taught myself some Arabic. I bing, 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 bing. I'm sure if I ordered a large load of fertilizer, somebody from the NSA would be there because there's an algorithm out there that's tracking my shit, right? and for all of us. But once you put biometrics in there, yeah, it's really dicey. So
it also gives someone else the ability to impersonate you, right? So if that biometric data leaked from just the security aspect, like you already have a issue with identity theft and people assuming, like I don't know if you guys look at Brian Krebs stuff and all the tax return things. People assuming to be you, right? So as people, our identity arguably is one of our most precious resources from a data perspective, right? So keeping that secure, locking that down, again, with ethics and thinking about those types of things is good, right? So biometric thing, that kind of freaks me out a little bit, right? Like if somebody could do that or fake, you see on movies like how they lift fingerprints and stuff like that, but in a real world scenario where somebody could fake that and actually truly be you, to me that's kind of a scary situation.
Right, and also people think that, and now I'm going to get into another area of interest, but people think that the authentication that I use on this is the same as verification, and it's not. You know, the analog for this is a key. I have an image stored locally. I'm just matching against that image. I haven't checked with any third party. I haven't checked and verified any data. I haven't actually presented any identification to be identified as me. I've just done a local key.
Not to mention it can be any way to get access to that key.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you can dupe that key, done, I'm in. But I'm in, and now I have access to all this stuff that should have been verified. And the difference between authentication and verification and then actual identification, presenting something and saying, who is this? That's often where biometrics is used, like in a crowd, doing facial identification. But like the key scenario, sorry, now I'm way down the rabbit hole, but the authentication versus the identification, those are two very different scenarios, and it's totally conflated in the public's mind all the freaking time, and that really concerns me. Anyway, yeah?
Can you speak more to the practicalities of asking your end users about their comfort level?
Yeah, we were really surprised when we sat down with end users, and we had a product from Intel called DataBank for a while that we were checking on how identity was being used and how people's personal information was being used. And we were spelling this out. And there were two big findings. We were surprised by both of them. One is people did not realize, people would skip through, you know, all the warnings. They just skip through it. So we said, oh yeah, this is being used. This is why you get those ads. They're like, oh, brain blown. Like, most people do not get this. Most average human beings do not understand this. And so that was a surprise. The other thing that was a surprise was people did not understand that data could be correlated. And that one piece of data could lead to another piece, could lead to another piece, like you were just saying. So being able to spell that out, once we spelled it out, and this was the big surprise, once we spelled it out, they were like, oh, okay, I'm good with that. We're like, wait, you're okay with that? And they're like, yeah, that's fine, now that you explained it. And so that, for us, was a really big finding. We were like, wow, if you spell it out, there's going to be a percentage. There's going to be like 15 to 20% of people who are going to be like, no, back away, you can't have my data. Great, okay. The other 80% of people that we talked to, again, this is only a sample set, the other 80% were like, great, I get ads for recliners, sounds good, you know? So, but that 20%, like, we don't want their data anyway if they are comfortable with it. These are the people who will sue you. These are the people who are being stalked by an ex-lover or something. These are the people who don't want their data stored. You don't want their data either, because that exposes you to ethical risk and legal risk, and so that's good. But what I was really surprised by was the vast majority of average people out there, once we explained it in human language, they were like, sounds good. Which, like, some of the stuff they were saying sounds good, I was not saying sounds good, because I didn't feel comfortable with it. But it was interesting. When you spell things out, people aren't going to just chuck your technology all the time. Some people are more comfortable with, like, all sorts of stuff that I consider really private. They're like, no problem. So that was really an interesting finding. And to be clear, Intel is not currently shipping a product called DataBank. We tested this extensively. It was actually in public messaging that we were testing it. But what we were doing was finding out exactly the answers to those questions of how comfortable are people when you explain things. Do people actually know? So those findings were really valuable. So what? Yeah. So my mission is to have people start asking the awkward questions and start asking exactly that. Like, okay, we're shipping something in China and Argentina. These two cultures have very different values on exposure of private information. How do we balance those? That's the right question to ask. I don't have a cut and dried answer. But the fact that people are not asking that all the time stirs the hell out of me. And so ethics as a domain, I think, should be foregrounded for us. And it's a large domain. There's lots of questions to ask. There are many philosophers who have thought about this. It's a whole academic discipline. You can get a PhD in ethics. But I want to distinguish it separately from just legal. And saying, oh, we had the lawyer sign is insufficient. And so, yes, it's a big area and big questions, but so is tech. I mean, we grapple with complex algorithmic decisions every day. We're learning, creating new languages, creating new containers, new cloud technologies. We should be able to think about ethics with some sort of brain. And that's what I'm encouraging. I'm not saying there is a cut and dried answer. Ask these questions. I'm the question guy, not the answer guy. Yeah, but hey, thank you all for coming.